amenities. I mean, kids they don't take swimming lessons in private pools.
Sure, this swimming pool here is interior.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So, I mean, what I see is, yeah, you have considered the internal amenities for folks living there. I'm not so sure about the external amenities because, again, that south side, nobody's going to hang out there. We are never, ever going to meet our neighbors and hang out together in a loading zone. So I'll just leave that as my comment on that. On affordable housing, it's another motion that I plan on bringing tomorrow. We've heard from the community. We see what's happening around our city, that we have to get serious about affordable housing and real affordability. Like some just 80% below market, yes, but we need it at the 30th and 20th percentile, so that, as one of our speakers stated today, the folks who are working in the coffee shops, serving over at an arena later on, working in the service industry can also afford to live here. And so do you have a question? Family units. So is the proponent open to having real affordability at that level and providing family units, 2 and 3 bedroom units for affordability? Because that's what we need in all of the city, but certainly be looking forward here.
So as part of the through Madam Chair, as part of the holding provision recommended in the zoning details, TIP Albert has committed to working with the planning department and also the councillor to come to an agreement on the provision of affordable housing that's consistent with the policies of the official plan. And so we are willing to work with staff to find an agreement and find a solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's it for questions of the Councillor Leeper again. I keep forgetting you. It's hard to do since you are always there. Is that, but only Councillor Leeper, because then I'm going to excuse the delegations and we'll go for questions of our. And by the way, pardon? Not on my list, there isn't. I don't have another person on my list. So, but just so you all know, because 12:30 we're going to break. Councillor Deans is here because there is somebody to speak to Hawthorne, so I've asked staff who are doing a presentation on the annual development report to them back. So with your agreement, we will have the Hawthorne item. Didn't you have questions on the Hawthorne item? Was that the one you wanted? Okay. All right, so back to your questions of the delegation.
Thank you. This is one of the interesting opportunities we have to raise the architecture of the overall building. I think you have a responsibility to the people of Ottawa to have an iconic, beautiful building at this kind of height. Moving forward, every establishing shot of the city that we see before the hockey game or the football game is going to include this building. It will help define the landscape. How have you taken, what has been your thought process with respect to the narrative around developing or designing this architecture? Because it doesn't look particularly iconic to me right now, it just looks tall. Where might it go?
Councillor, it's an excellent question, and thank you for asking. Ottawa's prominence is obviously near and dear to everyone here in the city, but it's also a global stage, and we're keenly aware of that fact. The architecture of the city, if you can indulge me just to make some observations real quick, is very much in the sort of broader context of North America is very much dominated by the national government buildings, and specifically Peace Tower at present. which is very much an architecture of its time, but the key element to it is slenderness and the height that it represents. We certainly did not want to try to compete with that because it's such a rich architectural heritage, but we did want to be part of that language. And so every move that we've made in the tower portions of the buildings have been really driven around trying to emphasize that slenderness. And we started with a very much a sort of sculptural and artistic approach to these slender buildings that are stepping up, kind of gradually reaching sort of aspirationally into the sky, but also being narrow within the context of the also, we tried to create a sort of a sculptural form that kind of steps down, emphasized with this sloping view and the sloping form back here, and ultimately reinforced by both these vertical stripes that we believe will shimmer in the skyline, kind of reinforcing the slenderness and the elegance of the towers, as well as a number of key kind of details here that will also reflect that. And then at nighttime, there's a lighting plan that's woven into the overall massing and the sculptural form of the buildings that'll be very legible across the sky. So in summary, we really felt it was important to reinforce a concept that was driven by sort of an elegance and an urban sophistication, a simplicity, and something that would both reinforce that traditional reference to the architectural heritage, but wouldn't dominate that as well, but would complement it and reinforce it. And it ends up creating those sorts of bookends on the skyline. Now, having said that, we are in the process of working with the UDRP, and we look forward to that conversation evolving. Yeah. And
actually, maybe I'll ask staff afterwards, but I am looking forward to seeing some kind of an architectural discussion around this. Come back to us at some point, because it's a critical building. It is so much taller than anything else that we have in the city, and when the world is looking at Ottawa on their television screens, I'd like this to be distinguishable. Maybe a little bit more workaday consideration. There is significant flexibility being built into the amendment, where, and forgive me, I'm probably going to get this wrong, the 65-story tower is only permitted in Area A. The zoning or the amendment would allow in B and C a flipping of the 56 and the 27-story tower. I guess I've got a couple of questions around that. Why don't we know that at this point for approval? Why do we need that flexibility? And then what is the different effect on the neighborhoods around if those do end up getting flipped?
Thank you. The idea of allowing for that flexibility was a notion that came up from our last UDRP session, and there's a couple of design advantages that may be brought forward in part of that larger discussion in flipping the towers on the south edge. You're correct. On the northwest corner, the tallest building will stay there. Now, programmatically, you have an office tower and a residential tower. What's consistent with all three in any arrangement is the towers. So that's not an issue, but the idea is that in switching the two, you may start to break down some of the overall mass of the three buildings collectively, that you might be able to either further stretch or reposition the towers on site to create some more space between and improve the lines. As well, given the unique shape of the site, if we were to consider an office tower on the east side and take advantage of that flat iron shape, you might actually see a resculpting of the office tower to kind of build on the prominence of that unique geometry of the site. So those are ideas that were expressed by the UDRP. We wanted to build in that flexibility in the zoning bylaw, and as Sean and Paul have mentioned, that's kind of a discussion of what we'd like to see happen.
May I ask Sean, because there has been that thought put into the interface with surrounding neighborhoods, what would it mean to switch those around from the initial concept plan that I believe sees the 27-story tower in the southwest or parcel B? What if that were switched over to the other side? How would it integrate differently with the existing community?
Councillor, let me just pull up another image here. Let me go back to what I said earlier. The need to have significant services access into the building has driven the location of that access point on the low side of the slope. Okay. And that's located underneath the center street that's up above. So if we were to take those two towers and swap them on the opposite from one side to another, it wouldn't necessarily change that, but it may bring an opportunity to reconfigure some of the amenity services that come on down and access. I'm not quite sure until we started designing it, but
it seems like a really significant consideration, where the 27 goes and where the 56 goes. Is it premature to be making a decision on the zoning today without knowing that?
Madam Chair, just the way the zoning, it's built in with the flexibility, and it's obviously before committee and before council, but the way it's established now, the way the three towers, it's planning's position that this is an appropriate development for the site, and as well, if it was to be turned around the other way, you'd have the 27-story tower, which would be, as I say, closer to the east and to the development that's further down there, and just create a different sort of a transition or sort of a materialistic texture. But as well, if something was, and I think Councillor McKinney had mentioned through the site plan control process, those towers would come back could come back to committee through that process to have a look at what the final rendition was. But certainly, either or from planning's perspective, they would both work from a zoning perspective and from a policy direction perspective. And as I mentioned, the site plan control process would give the opportunity for a committee to weigh in on that.
Okay. The Hintonburg Community Association, Ms. Parrott, raised the lack of visual interest on the west side. How are you treating that comment? It's one that is being felt throughout the Hintonburg community across the tracks.
You're able to see, but this one on the opposite side here is a closer view. And as you can see, in the to the north side of the transit connection bridge there as it approaches Albert in this area. This is all visually glazed, so there's a lot of access to be able to see into the restaurants, areas that are occupying this corner and this space along here, as well as down on this level where there's additional retail space. In this image where you see the stripes along here, there are windows and glazing into that space so that the retail users, I know in this image that looks opaque, but actually there's quite a bit of glazing into that facade.
I just, I would note that there is a significant grade difference between the Hintonburg and these surfaces. I doubt that you're going to see it. I think the comment is based more on what the west side of the upper tower looks like. Sorry, did you need me to? So there's a significant grade difference from the other side of the tracks on the west-hand side. It goes down a fair bit. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that you're pointing out at the podium level is invisible to the residents in Hintonburg. The upper portion of the tower is where I think the greater concern is.
All right. Yeah, Councillor, I understand the question now. So The residential units and the office tower facades are looking this way. In the upper level here, though, of the podium, this is a highly programmed and active space with lots of landscape planting as well as outdoor seating areas. So we see this as being a space with a lot of activity occurring in this facade.
I would encourage you to take a look at the office building and that west facade and see what might be done to just make that a little bit less of a uniform and monotonous face to the community west.
Okay, noted. We will engage with the UDRP.
And then finally, with respect to housing affordability, that's something I'm very keen on seeing. These are, for the most part, going to be rentals, I believe?
That's correct.
What has been your discussion with staff, if any, to date about how long affordability might be guaranteed for, what some of the legal mechanisms will be in place in order to ensure that it stays affordable? How far along that path have you gone? And I am interested in the mechanics specifically, because this is going to keep coming up, and we'll be dealing with it this afternoon on Nelson as well.
Madam Chair, there's a holding provision right now on the affordable housing piece, so in terms of conversations around that's still to take place. I don't know if Mr. James has any further to add to that, but certainly that is going to be a part of a greater conversation we're going to be having.
Okay, so TBD. Yeah. All right, thank you. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. And before you leave, though, I've asked Councilor Kenny to give an overview of the types of motions she's going to move tomorrow, because as you know, with LPAT as opposed to the OMB, it's important that the applicant gets an opportunity, and also anybody in the audience too who has registered today and who has spoken to the area that she's looking at, so that you can send us in writing, because no one gets to speak at council. So that's one thing that I should have thought of at the beginning, which is why I actually read what I read at the beginning, right? So it's really, if you could provide an overview of the motions you're intending.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So depending on whether this passes here today or not, or what changes we make, certainly going forward tomorrow at a high level, as I mentioned, a motion to redirect the $450,000 from the Section 37 that's already in place. That would be going towards a community garden fund and a park fund for the ward. I will have a specific motion on affordable housing to ensure that it is truly affordable and family. I will want a motion, and I haven't decided yet, motion or direction dealing very specifically with the south side loading zone. I think that as long as that loading zone is in place, we will never have an animated south side, and we will make the very same mistake as somebody mentioned earlier that we did at Holland Cross. I will have a motion to remove the surface parking on the southeast side, and my directions will be at the new intersections that the level of service for pedestrians and cyclists are top level of service. Direction, Mr. Mark, on my direction in terms of parking, he did give advice that I give direction now to staff to prepare a motion for tomorrow to seek the change in the zoning for the parking phase-in, so we can discuss how that might look. And last direction I'll be giving tomorrow will be with respect to the Tall Tower Subcommittee, after it's been to UDRP and the Tall Tower Subcommittee, that it actually come back to committee and council, so that at the very least, if we ensure that whatever is built here is architecturally significant, and that we don't just allow a building that has no significance to it in terms of the architecture. So those, in kind of a broad sense, are the motions and directions that I expect to bring back tomorrow, or whenever we hear this. Yeah, so that pedestrians, cyclists, level of service of A.
Okay, good. Yeah, do you have any questions for clarification before you leave?
Or am I able to respond to any of those motions? Or?
No, you're going to respond in writing.
Okay.
Okay?
Thanks.
Good?
Oh, sorry, and there was one more. Sorry, I get it. Yes. I am going to have a motion on the number of bicycle parking spots. I wanted to equal the number of parking spots.
Pardon me, say that one again.
The number.
How many are there right now in the plan? How many are there in the plan?
There are 800, 740 underground, 60 on the surface, so 800 bicycle parking in total.
Okay, and what is it you're looking for?
Well, I'd like them to at least equal the number of vehicle parking spots that we have.
Yeah. Maybe on the south side. There you go. Mission accomplished. Anyway, at the bottom of the stairs. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay? So you have your work cut out for you before tomorrow. And now, questions of staff. And does anybody have questions of staff? Councillor Cloutier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci. What is the total Section 37 amounts? We see the cash contributions. What's the value of the non-cash contributions?
Thank you. The estimated value for the non-cash contributions is $2.5 million.
That includes the 975?
That's above the 975,
above
but we are the city is only receiving $975,000 in cash.
The rest is non-cash. Got it. And was the councillor involved in the distribution, the 450, which I acknowledge she wanted to see changed, and the 525 for the housing fund?
Yes, those are the discussions we had with the ward office.
Okay, and I recognize that you want that 450 to be reassigned. What if it's reassigned? What happens to the construction of that pedestrian cycling overpass for the O train? Are we?
Thank you. So that indexed money of around $450,000 would be pushed to for the ward's affordable housing fund, so it goes straight to that.
I'm referring to the $450,000 of Councillor McKenney's motion tomorrow.
Yep. The extra.
To change the 450 from the construction of the future pedestrian cycling bridge.
Right.
What happens to that pedestrian cycling bridge?
So two things. The $100,000 into the community garden fund, if I remember correctly, and then the $350 would be a new process or a series of discussions with the answer as to how that space is designed or what it looks like.
Got that?
Okay. But, Madam, I'll just say, Madam Chair, with respect to the bridge, there was $450,000 right now, and for the Section 37. In the secondary plan, there's only another $450,000 that when City Centre is developed to put towards that bridge. That's all the money. So there was $900,000 towards that bridge. There was nothing else. So that money would have had to have come out of, say, future Section 37, be identified as something that could be done through development charges, or something that Council would put away as money for capital funds, something like they did for the Hickory Street Bridge. So, but there's no real money actually to construct that bridge today.
To design and partially construct.
Yeah.
Does that put the bridge in jeopardy?
Well, the bridge really never had that much money to go towards it. It only had $900,000, and the Hickory Street Bridge cost about $2.1 million, and this would probably put a zero on that to get that bridge. So the bridge, not really, because it never really had much to start with. As I mentioned, money would need to come from sort of a capital fund or to be raised somewhere else through different processes. So long term, no, it still was as viable as it was. It's just lost $450,000. That's it.
So it was a drop in the bucket to construct that bridge. Got it. And I guess my last question is, can you give us any guidance on when city centre, is there any plan, what's going to happen with city centre? I saw the concept, I think is just a concept plan of future towers there.
City Center has been engaged to this most recent application and the previous report that came in 2012, and there's no immediate plans for them to start to advance their development project. They're aware of the proposal, but there's no active engagement on a construction for city centers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper, then Councillor Nussbaum, then Councillor Chiarelli. Anybody else that has questions of staff? And let's and did you have any wrap up too, or is that going to be because okay? So let's do this as questions and wrap up as well, okay?
And I don't think I need to wrap up. People are certainly hearing the concerns that I have, but I do have some specific questions, and it relates to the resources that will be available for the broader geography as it continues to intensify. The first question...
Can I just interrupt, because that's a question I have, so I'd like you to embellish it a bit. When you think of what is the greater geography?
You know, so...
I mean through staff, what are they thinking? So that, as we know, and Councillor McKenney and I had a good meeting yesterday for 45 minutes or something, talked about the connectivity of the Gladstones coming, there'll be more at Bayview, the Tom Brown Arena, right? I always want to call him Frank Brown, but Tom Brown Arena, all of those pieces will all be part of the jigsaw puzzle, right?
There's an area that's going to be really intensively developed that goes from the escarpment through to Tunney's pasture as a particular, and I think that kind of mirrors the size of the geography that we identified for area-specific development charges in the Carling-Preston plan, and that relates to one of the questions that I have. First, for the Section 37. Can you tell me how much was originally calculated in terms of the value of the uplift, and then how much was taken down to through drawdowns?
I don't have the data in front of me for that scenario, but what's important to note about the file at the time is that this was outside of formal city process for Section 37 drawdowns. And we approached DCR Phoenix and told them we wanted to do a Section 37 type agreement for this site, given the uplift. So they voluntarily agreed to enter into that negotiation, and we came to the settlement that today in Part 19 of the bylaw that outlines those contributions for Section 37.
But the process you followed must have been very similar. You calculated an uplift value and then began talking that value down through the drawdown negotiations?
There would have been similar type discussions, yes, but outside of a formal drawdown rate and guidelines as to what the criteria would be for drawdown factors. But a general process that was the same today, most likely.
Okay, so you're not prepared today to tell us what the calculation of the uplift value was, and then how that would have been negotiated in whichever direction?
That's information.
Okay, I'd be interested in taking a look at that one. Forgive me, it has had a complicated development history, what with the infrastructure moves, etc. What will this project do in terms of development charges?
Okay. Madam Chair, the development charges are about 28 million. Okay. Through the Brownfields program, they'll get, they have an exemption of about 7. Okay. So there's about 21 million or so, and that the city will get through development charges from this.
If I could ask you tomorrow or sometime before the end of day today or before midnight, us in the breakdown of those DCs, how much for recreation facilities, how much for libraries, how much for fire, para, etc.
All right, Madam Chair, sure.
Thank you, appreciate that. Get that. Does this generate any cash in lieu? Forgive me.
Yes, cash in lieu of parkland fees will be paid over and above everything we've talked about today on Section 37.
Do you have a ballpark figure for how much those are?
I don't have that because we haven't done an updated assessment of the land value.
And that would be done through the site plan process anyway, so.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll be probably about, the residential will most likely be up to 10% of the value of the land, and the commercial is 2% of the value of the land, so it's a combination thereof. So it'll depend on when CREO does our appraisal for us through the site plan.
Okay. Let's say that the cash in lieu is probably worth at least a couple of million. There's $21 million available from development charges. Is there an opportunity to devote those to a specific geography. We don't have an area-specific development charge for this area. If it were council's will, could we do that?
That might be a question partly for Mr. But when you say council's will, but
Madam Chair, as the council noted, there is no area-specific development charge for this area, so it goes into the general development charge revenues of the city, and it's allocated in accordance with a background study that will be revised in May of next year.
The inside the greenbelt charges for things like a new pool, for example, are currently inadequate ahead of a revisiting of the DC bylaw. Maybe I'll chat with the senior staff and with the councillor to see what might be possible on that. Plant pool keeps coming up, and one of my biggest problems, and I fully agree with Councillor McKenney, is you don't learn how to swim, you don't have seniors classes in the private pool. The private pool is generally a private amenity space. We need a new one to serve the residents of Centertown and of Hintonburg, and there might be an opportunity here to try to funnel some money into something that's more geographically segmented. I am looking forward to seeing how those motions go tomorrow. Today I'm not going to be able to support this without knowing that those are being solved, but I do appreciate all the delegations who have come out and the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rupert. Councillor Nussbaum, followed by Councillor Shirelli, and then Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a number of questions to staff. The first question involves anticipated step backs for the towers, and I'm looking at document 3 in the staff report on page 29. And in the proposed sectors, sector A, B, C, and D, there is no provision right now for any step backs at all. It's zoned for the entire area, so we get 65 stories for sector A, 27 for B, et cetera, et cetera. Yet the community design plan, the CDP, is very clear, and our own high-rise guidelines that we just passed at council a month ago are very clear on the importance of step backs at certain heights. And so for example, in this case, we have in the CDP that for buildings taller than 12 stories, a minimum step back of 6 meters should occur after the 6th story. A minimum setback of 6 meters should occur after 6 stories. And then if you look at another spot in the CDP, we have very important reference to the fact that the CDP's design policies take precedence over these guidelines in the case of any inconsistencies due to the CDP's grounding in the specific local context. So I think that's very important, and having heard how extensive the CDP work was, my question to staff is, why aren't the step backs noted in the proposed zoning schedule?
If you look at thank you for the question first off. The underlying zoning is a mixed MC zone, and it had very permissive performance standards and often zero requirements for setbacks. But I think in the larger scale in the design of this, there was direction and response taken from the Bayview Station District Secondary Plan that talked about having appropriate building transition and creating that strong pedestrian scaled or human scaled podium along the Albert Street frontage, and particularly along the east. And we do see a significant overall setback, I'd call it, from the eastern edge of the low-rise community to Tower C, which is a 6-story tower. That's about 75 meters. So yes, it is not prescribed in the zoning bylaw, but through the extensive design sessions and the additional sessions to come, the notion of finely detailing or advancing that podium and tower design concept would be advanced and refined, and then that would therefore address that concern and some of those urban design guidelines for that proper relationship when you're putting a tall tower on a podium.
Mr. Vice Chair, yeah, we understand the need for what step-backs do and what they do create with respect to design. And as Mr. Diaco has said, through that process in the Tall Building Design Review Panel to create a situation where you do have sort of relief to end up with a sort of a tower and podium situation that creates basically an interesting facade at the street level, both along Albert Street and also along the rear area in the back when viewed by members of pedestrians. So there will be an opportunity to refine that and define that, and I guess it creates an ability to move the towers around by just saying that you can have a tower in this section, and through the processes, as I mentioned, for the urban design, you'll create a situation that would meet the intent of well, it's not in the policy direction, but is found in the community design plan.
Sorry, so given the very clear position in the CDP, and I appreciate that the towers may move around within the specific areas, but given the very specific direction in the CDP, why not establish a 6-meter step back above the 6th-story podium throughout the areas where you're going to have more than 12 stories? Is it because you plan on ignoring the CDP?
It's not, well, first off, it's only a 3-story podium that they're proposing here, so there is no 6th story on that podium to step back, as the CDP suggests. But I think what we're trying to accomplish here is the balance, and it's largely influenced by the programming of the entire site, which is a mixed-use podium sitting atop 2 residential towers and an office tower. So I have through many other projects, had that discussion on where to set back such a building and at what. And a lot of it is contextual response, and then again with the programming of the overall project, which is those 3 towers rising from a human scale podium. So the architect has left the conversation, but that's a influence into the whole design of the project, and prescribing a 6 setback at whatever story is perhaps not the best response given this design intent and the program they're building. It may be achieved in other ways here.
So did your colleagues who work on the CDP make a mistake?
Mr. Vice Chair, the intent, I think, in the community design plan is to create the level, a podium that is has a sort of a public identity, one that is not necessarily has to be done through a specific setback or step back at a specific level, but to create animation and activity and to create a livable environment at the ground level. And I think it's important, as Mr. Diaco has said, and I would say not to be confined or strictly related to having to do something specific that was in the community design plan that wasn't necessarily actually in the existing zoning today, which is a regulation, but to create that situation at the ground level, as Councillor McKinney has said, which is very important, is what happens there. And by step back or having a setback or having different methods of creating transition that create that grounded level experience that is a positive experience. And if it's not exactly that certain amount of 6 meters or whatever the step back is, you're still trying to create that good ground experience. So I wouldn't say that they made a mistake. There is direction to, in my opinion, is to create that activity and separation of tower and podium, and it can be done through different means, as I mentioned, is something that we will look at through the Tall Building Design Review Panel.
Okay, just a couple of points on that. Firstly, it's not just in the CDP, it was enshrined in the secondary plan. So the step back requirements, I'm looking at them right now, are in the secondary plan. This is about step backs, but it's sort of not about step backs. It's about the casual with which I interpret the staff are treating the CDP and the secondary plan. I guess, at the heart of this, what I'm troubled with is we asked a whole bunch of community members and a whole bunch of other people, planners and interested people. We formed a public advisory group. We did a lot within the last 5 years to come up with what looks like a very solid document with very prescriptive ideas and on the step backs, guided by a sense that the pedestrian experience is significantly enhanced if you're walking along Albert Street or you're walking along City Center and you're not looking up at a 65-story building, but you try and hide that height. And that same idea was captured in the high-rise guidelines, which Council passed a month ago. And I guess I'm troubled by the casualness with which, staff, in this case, Mr. Vice Chair, are choosing to ignore that very specific guidance, which we've now stated specifically in this document, and moreover, we said, and this has precedence over the larger general guidelines because it's locally specific, but also given that the proposal also violates the high-rise guidelines, which we just passed. So there were very specific rules about step backs, and I don't see those in the zoning guidelines, and I guess I'm asking, why should council approve a zoning schedule which very clearly violates the secondary plan, and there's no provision for amending the secondary plan on these step backs, and the high-rise guidelines which we just passed? And again, you could argue, step backs is a small thing, but I would say it gets to the very heart of the pedestrian experience around that site, and moreover, it indicates a certain view and philosophy about how the CDP and the secondary plan are being treated. But let me move on to my next question, which is a question related to recommendation 3 of the proposal before us. And so staff are suggesting that we recommend that council consider this report at its meeting tomorrow. I'm just trying to understand why. I understand that there's going to be a holding provision put on the zoning. I understand that there's going to be more work with the UDRP. Why, for a project of this importance and this significance, would we not provide the ward councillor? It sounds like there's going to be some back and forth on a whole series of motions which we haven't seen yet. It sounds like the applicant's going to have an opportunity to comment on that.
That's true.
Why are staff recommending that we deal with this tomorrow as opposed to the normal course of events?
Ms. Steadman's going to answer that. Ms. Steadman's going to answer that, and that's your 5 minutes this round. So if you have more questions, you have to get on after Councillor Shirley and McKinney.
Madam Chair, because of the break that Council is taking, the 8-week break, we just felt it was for customer service purposes that we're providing at this planning committee's agenda would move forward to council tomorrow. It's kind of in keeping with what we do traditionally this time of year, just because of that break. It was just felt that it's not necessarily fair to the applicants that they wait that 8-week break just because council is no longer meeting.
So I'll just let everybody know that I promised Councillor Deans, Councillor Nussbaum, I promised Councillor Deans that before we break for lunch, so we won't be breaking for lunch until after we deal with Hawthorne, okay? And then we'll come back for a lot of other stuff. So anybody who is here for anything from items 2 to 8, I think, if you're here at all, then feel free to go and have some lunch. Councillor Shirelli, question, wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was actually going to deal with the recommendation number 3 issue as well, because I can't think of a weaker reason to deny the public the opportunity to comment in the intermittent period between committee and council than just the fact that we have a break, and therefore it would seem unfair to the developer. The principle that we established for decades in this region was that there is always a break between when committee deals with a major item and when it gets dealt with by council. And at 2 previous governance reviews, we said we could truncate that in extraordinary circumstances where it was important to the survival of a project or there was an emergency around an issue, that we would kick it right to council without the normal breathing period in between. And become far too common lately at council, to the point where just about every item on today's agenda is going to be kicked to council the very next day. And what I would like to know is,
didn't everybody realize when the committee meetings were scheduled, and didn't everybody realize when the council meeting was scheduled? And when you have an idea of this importance, why would you not ensure it gets to committee 2 weeks earlier, or some other configuration so that there isn't only a 20-hour breathing period between the initial approval and the council approval? So that's the question.
Okay, so it's no different than what we do every July meeting. So, and I will share this with you because I actually asked for it as far as all the meetings and everything and the community participation, to assuage your fears that people don't know about it, and I think we had good representation from the community today. That's just my opinion, and I'm going to isolate that item so you can vote on it separately. Okay?
Okay. Right. So, because I'm telling you, this committee meeting, I come here to hear the evidence, and I didn't hear a whole lot of evidence against the height. I was kind of surprised. I heard a lot of evidence about other concerns. So I'm not even saying I would vote against the project, but what I'm saying is I am committed to the principle that people should have that breathing period between committee approval and council. Okay, so on the...
including the applicant in this case. As you know, that's...
But they were part of the process too that saw it land at this date. So deals with site plan issues, and specifically the loading zones, storage, etc. How much of those issues also fall in the hands of the ward council?
Thank you. Those are all traditional elements that we'd be looking at in detail through the site plan control review, and the ward councillor will see a copy of the plans to be approved and the conditions at site plan, yes. Yeah. So through that process, we would be again engaging with the ward office and building on some of the directions of staff that Councillor McKenney has already suggested today.
I didn't shut you off. Councillor McKenney is my witness.
A significant number of the concerns I heard today deal with what I view as site plan issues. So are we still on the understanding that Councillor McKenney or whoever the ward councillor is involved are going to be, will be able to deal with those in the normal way?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, and yeah, I guess that's basically my concern. So I will vote on number 3 just to make the point, because I don't think this is a good practice to go forward with. And secondly, some surprised about what you see at committee, and I was today.
Okay, so before we go back to Councillor McKenney, Councillor Nussbaum has more questions or wrap up, or whatever he has, but that's it. Ain't nobody else, because I will go to Councillor McKenney and give her the last say. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, but I had some additional questions on those are going to be passed on further to Councillor Leeper's questions. So yeah, I guess I can just wrap up at this stage and say that I think what's really important for me for this application is the notion that again and again around this table that in cases where we don't have secondary plans and we don't have CDPs, we've recognized the gaps. Sometimes it was easier to look at spot zoning in the absence of those because we could look to the general official plan and had to look at the principles. But in this case, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that Council within the last 5 years has passed a secondary plan and a CDP specifically for this site that has a number of really important elements, some relating to height, some relating to step backs, some relating to public realm. And I don't think it's unfair to say that many of those have not been respected in this application. And the reason why I'm worried about that is that I'm not sure moving forward that when residents ask me about the value of a secondary plan or the value of a CDP, I will be able to tell them with confidence that them participating with volunteer hours in that process is going to give them the certainty, the predictability, the kind of rule-based approach for a particular area that they may think they're getting, and we sort of often tell them they will when we talk about a secondary plan. And so I voted in favor of the Carling Preston application because I noted that we had planned for that. There was expectation management with local residents. In this case, there's no expectation management. In fact, the city, by doing a very good job, an excellent job on the CDP and the secondary plan 5 years ago through all the various elements, I think created an expectation that that city staff and city council would follow it. And in fact, right here on page 10 of the CDP, city councilors and staff will use the CDP to evaluate capital projects and development applications and to ensure that new developments reflect the recommendations, vision, and principles of CDP, and to ensure. And clearly in this case, staff have not ensured through their positive recommendation that this development application reflects the recommendations, vision, and principles of CDP. And so for the sake of future trust between the city and its residents, not even having to deal with the specific problems with this application, I can't support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McKinney for wrap up.
Thank you. Just on clarity first on the site plan control. When this comes back to site plan and we start lifting the holding provisions, you had responded to Councillor Chiarelli that the ward councillor would have an opportunity then to lift delegated authority. And so can you just tell us exactly what that means? So if the councillor lifts delegated authority, let's say the councillor decides that the loading zone is still there and it just will not work. It will not provide what the secondary plan calls for, and that combined with height, whatever, will not work. What is then the process for moving through that to ensure a better application?
Sure, Chair. There's really three things, I suppose. There's two holdings. One is for the tall buildings, and the other one is for affordable housing. And site plan, of course, you can move delegated authority. So you can remove delegated authority because all three of those are done at the staff level. So by requesting that it come to committee, it would come back here to be discussed again on the public forum to debate what has been determined and what has been decided, then debate the merits of it. So just through, I guess it's a formal thing as a request to staff to do that. But there's the opportunity once that happens and staff would write a report or reports, whatever the case may be, to come back to committee with a recommendation just as we do now, and it will be debated at that time.
And so, Councillor, for example, say that you go of the site plan, which you're absolutely already thinking about, and you decide, okay, I like what I see. Then you can release your delegated authority and it doesn't come back here. However, lifting delegated authority doesn't give you the right to tie it up till whenever. For example, has the delegated authority to take away that lifting and have it come back, since you asked the question. I don't know that everybody knows that.
But with lifting delegated authority, if in fact we weren't satisfied with what comes back, it would come back to committee. Yep. Okay. So just quickly wrap up because there will be a lot more discussion tomorrow on this, and just want to state again, as I have, as members of the community have on height, and I've said it before many times, height is neither good nor bad. What's the difference really between 45 stories and 65? it depends on what happens on the ground. And, you know, what's happening here on the ground is not good. You know, we've got 4 sides, and none of them are as animated as they need to be to make this a truly urban, active, animated, vibrant part of the downtown, or any community really. You know, so we go back to the CDP and the secondary plan, and it did not call for 65 stories. It did not call for 45 stories, and it didn't call for 30 plus. And of course, council is supreme, and you can bring any recommendation recommending 30 plus, or, you know, above the CDP, or what the secondary plan calls for. But the fact is, it was very clear in the secondary plan that 30 stories was the limit. What was also very clear was that south side be animated. And I want to make it very clear that I am not looking for separation from trucks, for cyclists and pedestrians. What I'm looking for, and what the community has always looked for and been very articulate in what they're looking for, is a reason to use that south side. We are going to have maybe 2,000 new neighbors here in this development, and that's a good thing. We actually want that. I want 2,000 new neighbors, but I want to meet them. I want my kids to play with their kids. I want to, you know, as we all age, I want to hang out with them. We are never, ever going to meet each other. We're never going to bring our kids to a loading zone to do that, under any circumstances. We're going to use that pathway because there's nothing there. There's nothing drawing us to that pathway. But even if we did, we'd walk by each other. We have got to build communities that integrate. It's okay to build the downtown, and it's okay. It's a good thing to put in the amount of density that we're looking for here, all along this corridor, if and when it happens. But as it is happening, whether it happens slowly or it happens quickly, we have got to consider how we are going to live together, how we are going to take swimming lessons together, how we are going, you know, where are we going to hang out, what are we going to do? And that south side, I'm telling you, will never, ever give us the opportunity to meet our neighbors. What's going to happen on this, and I want it on record, you know, I might come back in 20 years and say, I told you so. What's going to happen here is drivers are going to come in, they're going to park, they're going to go up and down to where they need to go, they're going to come back out onto Albert, and they're going to leave. I don't know how many people know Albert Street very well, but it is not a welcoming area. There's nothing out there. It'll be great with the new transit station, and that's all very exciting, and there will be more people on it, but Albert is never going to be the place where we live, where we gather. It will never be a public square. That south side has got to be our public square. We are going to develop City Center. We are going to continue to develop down the Trillium line, as we should, but we've got to make sure that it is public space and integrated. And on top of that, we need affordability. We need everyone to live here. We have got issues in this city because we are...
You're way past your 5 minutes.
I know, and I'm very close.
You know, I know you're going to say this tomorrow and probably even a lot more.
I know.
So,
I know. But
when you don't get to vote today, I just say...
We cannot continue to segregate people in this city. We cannot continue to have poor neighborhoods in this city. We know that. That's what we're doing on Gladstone lands. It is the reason we've got issues in this city with violence and gun violence. We have got to have people living together. People have got to live with people who need. I'm going to finish tomorrow.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'll finish tomorrow.
I know you will. I know you will. And again, just a little reminder, you don't get to vote today, so save it for tomorrow. And yes, lots of great questions throughout all the process today. I mean, everybody did, well, Councillor Leeper in particular. So on this item, I'm going to divide it up. So we're going to put 1 and 2 together. 1 being the official plan and zoning amendment, 900 Albert Street, that the planning committee recommend council approve. I know you want the technical amendment. I'll do it in a minute. An amendment to the zoning for 900 Albert to permit an increase in height in mixed use, and implementing the zoning bylaw amendment not proceed to City Council until the agreement under Section 37 of the Planning Act is executed by the applicant. That's big. Number 2, that planning committee approve the consultation. Well, this is just like, so we'll approve the fact that people came out and spoke today, right? That's just a part that's all of it. So, but first of all, we have the technical amendment from Vice Chair Tierney that he already has introduced. Okay, so on the technical amendment, Carrie. So now we'll go to the, well, you know what, I'm going to vote on number 3 first because I think that makes sense. So number 3 is that, and this is part of all of the reports today, consider this report at its meeting on July the 11th pursuant to subsection 35.5 and 36.6 of the procedure bylaw 2016-377. So we'll have yeas and nays on that. And this is that Councillor Shirelli does not want it to go, that he spoke, he does not want it to go to council tomorrow. So, Councillor Blais? So this is just number 3. This isn't on the thing. This is that this report goes to council tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington's not here. Councillor Shirelli? No. Councillor Cluche?
Yes.
Councillor Hughley? Yes. Councillor Leeper?
No.
Councillor Nussbaum?
No.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Yes.
And myself, yes. 6-3. Okay. And then on items 1 and 2, this is substantive part, the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 900 Albert. Would you like to do that? Okay. Okay, Councillor Blais?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli? Yes. Councillor Cluche?
Yes.
Councillor Hughley? Yes. Councillor Leeper?
No.
Councillor Nussbaum?
No.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Yes.
And myself, yes. 7-2. Okay. Thank you much. Thank you very much, everybody that came out today. I'm sure that some of you will come stop by tomorrow because we'll have more to say. Okay. No, we're not having a lunch break yet. We're going, I promised Councillor Deans that we will go to the Hawthorne item right now. And we have a speaker. So this is the item, the zoning bylaw amendment, 3500 Hawthorne Road. After this, so if you're not here for Hawthorne Road, feel free to take a break until, let's say 1:30. Okay? Let's go wild. You know, give us more time, because you never know if all the elevators or any of them are working, on how you would actually get, yeah. We're not done yet. We have another item. I know, so, and we don't know how long it will take. Yeah. So, okay. Jeez, I got a headache. So this is a zoning bylaw amendment, 3500 Hawthorne Road. I'm going to ask Jared Cook, please come up and take the seat where everybody's been sitting. Can I ask everybody else to please go out in the hallway and have your conversation? And Nancy, you're going to want to speak too, so you'll be them up right after that. And then Councillor Deans is here. Thank you for coming, Councillor Deans. Okay, so this is zoning bylaw amendment. The Planning Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 3500 Hawthorne Road to permit a fast food and drive-through facility as detailed in document 2. So, Jared, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll set my timer so I don't forget to go.
I'll tell you if you want. If you want, I'll tell you when there's 1 minute left.
Okay.
Okay.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jared Cook. I'm a resident of 33 Foxton Place. So my backyard basically backs onto 3500 Hawthorne Road. I'm hoping to I am opposing the rezoning of 35 Hawthorne Road for several reasons. One, where we live is a very family-oriented community, a very family-oriented neighborhood. Our quality of living will be negatively affected from this due to the noise, light, and olfactory pollution having a fast food franchise drive-through in our backyard. Two, everyone's property and land value is likely going to go down. Three, there is already many fast food franchises nearby, as well as other gas stations, including one on the opposite corner, as pointed out in the report. And four, there are also concerns of increased accidents in the area at this already very busy intersection of Hawthorne and Hunt Club on-ramp to the Queensway. Continue. I'm hoping to effect change here today. I was initially deterred from attending this meeting because I was told that once this reached the rezoning committee, that it was likely a done deal. There was also a lot of smirking, joking, and lack of apathy shown by the presenters during the two council meetings, which we had prior. By preventing the rezoning of this drive-through, you will address most of the concerns that the neighborhood had during these meetings. Thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. Now, I know I probably have a minute or two left, so I thought I would just readdress a couple of things. I was pulled aside during this meeting and told that it is now going to be a second cup. Like that's going to make a big deal of the number of cars idling in the driveway beyond the yard of our children playing back there. To me, it doesn't. Not to mention, franchises change over time. It doesn't mean if it starts out second cup, it's going to remain that. Secondly, I noted a few things in the discussion here. One, it said that in our first meeting we had about 30 attendees, and that was in June. 30 attendees. Then in February 7th, we had 6 attendees. It was one of the worst snowstorms of the year, so that is why there was only 6 attendees. I gave Diane Dean what's the term I'm looking for? I took a survey of the neighborhood, and I got a petition signed. Yeah, a petition signed of the majority of the people in the neighborhood, including a number who were not in attendance at the meeting, as that is why they signed the petition. So that being said, you know, I looked through the report and it says things like risk management, there's no implications. Well, what about the accidents that are already prevalent at that intersection, and now we're going to put a second entrance onto an 80-kilometer going kilometer coming off of the Queensway. It says financial implications, no financial implications. Well, it says that a lot of these concerns have been addressed. Well, they were addressed, but I don't think they were addressed satisfactorily. And so in that sense, you know, and one of the things noted in our questions, although a number were gone through, you know, the property value was never addressed. So there's a financial implication, maybe not for the people setting up the thing, but for the rest of us in the neighborhood, it certainly is, especially some of us who this is our first house and young children. So that is two of the things, and I guess if I have any other points on my last page, I think that's all I really wanted to throw in there. Yeah. That's about it. Thank you very much for your time. Once again, those were just kind of additional points that came up to mind of recent.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Jeff, thank you very much. Any questions? No. Thanks for coming, sir.
Okay.
Ms. Meloche, 5 minutes.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
members
Cook, you
of the
can go
committee.
back to take your seat, please.
My name is Nancy Meloche. I'm a planner with Stantec, and I have with me Sahil Bihal, who is the owner of the property at 3500 Hawthorne Road. I think just to set the stage in terms of the current zoning for the property, the zoning on this property, which and you can see on the plan, is situated at the northwest corner of Hawthorne Road and Hunt Club. So it's a very busy intersection, and the current zoning permits a gas bar on this site as well as a car wash. So that can be done as of right. When Mr. Bihal acquired the property, his desire has been not to do the car wash, but instead to provide for a small fast food component as well as a drive-through. And that's what led us to the zoning amendment application, was the permission for fast food and drive-through. Convenience is also an as-of-right permission up to 120 square meters. So I just want to make that clear, that this is a site that already has pre-existing zoning, and it, in my opinion as a planner, is quite appropriate given the amount of traffic and volume that comes back and forth across Hunt Club. The 417 ramps are just to the east, heading to Montreal. So our concern in dealing with the community in this area was primarily those residents on Fox Den who abut the fence line that is adjacent to this property. So there's some 12 to 14 homes that would abut the fence line. So before we even went to a first public meeting, and I have to say we've had a very fulsome consultation process here, Mr. Bihal and I actually went out door to door, met with those residents because the impact's so immediate to them, and we talked to them about the issues before the first public meeting. And as Mr. Cook mentioned, there were about 30 people at the first meeting. We had a good discussion of the issues, and then at the second meeting, we had, in the winter, we had about six residents that were out, and again, we had a good discussion. Mr. Bihal and I actually went out just again in the last month and met with residents door to door. So I think we've really come to terms, in my opinion, with the issues, and those issues are contained in the planning staff report, I think, quite well, and I'll just very quickly highlight them. That in addressing concerns in the final plan, that the 2-lane drive aisle has been reduced to 1 lane, so we tightened up that access through the drive-through, reducing the amount of noise and any coming from vehicles. The width of the landscape buffer was increased. We've got about 6 meters of landscape buffer along the rear of this property, abutting the residences to the west. Garbage containers, we dealt with that. They've been placed up closer to the road, well away from the residential area. Pedestrian access has been improved. And there was a noise study that was conducted as part of this application for site plan and zoning, and the noise consultants were satisfied that the existing fence, which is about 10 feet high, running along the perimeter of the property, would be sufficient to deal with the uses that are proposed. So I believe that those are really my comments, in my opinion, and I think planning staff agree with that. I know they agree with it. This is quite an appropriate use for this property, and I think those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Meloche? Thank you. Okay. Question with staff? So no questions for you. So, thank you. And then we'll go to you, absolutely. questions and wrap up, because I think you're the only one asking any questions.
Yeah, just a very quick question.
And then we'll go to Councillor Deans.
I just would like to hear in staff's words what the rationale for not having drive-throughs in the general urban area is. So why did council in its wisdom make a decision within the zoning bylaw not to permit this use? And why in this case is there a rationale to do something different?
Nancy, go take your seats. Thank you. And can you repeat what your question, please? Because I honestly didn't hear it.
No, I'm asking staff to just explain why in the zoning, the general urban zoning, drive-through is not a permitted use. I just want to hear the rationale, and then why in this case there are grounds to do something different.
Madam Chair, so in this particular site, drive-through was not permitted. I don't know the history on why this particular site, but it is permitted in the general mixed-use area in general, drive-throughs, and why it was it's supported by staff in order to permit the drive-through here is a number of reasons, and I think the staff report goes through it, and Nancy described it as well, is the site design. When we look at drive-throughs, we look at the appropriateness in terms of setback and distance to residential. We want to make sure that the sound wall and speaker is going to work in terms of the speaker box locations and noise. And overall, in terms of the high order of the streets with next to arterial roads, we recognize that this type of site is appropriate for that land use. So that's the reason why staff would support the addition of the drive-through.
Thank you. Now over to Councillor Deans.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And as you can probably appreciate, I mean, this is a residential neighborhood, but it's abutting quite busy arterial roads. And, you know, infilling a use like this into this neighborhood is always challenging. All of us who represent suburban areas know that it's difficult to put a use with a drive-through behind homes, and there are challenges in doing that. So in this particular case, we started out when the applicant first came to see me and told me they wanted to move ahead with this use. We started out with a pre-consultation with the community association, and following that, I hosted 2 public meetings as we worked through the process, and we looked at the concerns that the community raised. Originally, there were 2 drive-through lanes. There was garbage at the back of the site. There were a number of issues, concerns with the operation of the intersection at Hunt Club and Hawthorne Road. And as we worked through those issues, we had the 2 public meetings. Additionally, as Ms. Melange noted, she went door to door with the applicant to personally address the concerns of the neighbors. And I have to tell you, closer to the end of the process, they settled on an operator, which is Second Cup. Second Cup does not cook on site, so there won't be cooking orders, and their volumes are less, and I believe it's not a 24-hour operation either. So there were a number of things that made it more desirable. So I can tell you that I went with the consultant door to door on Foxton, and we knocked on the doors at the end of the process to ask the residents most impacted if they were supportive of this application at that point. And not everyone was home, but we did talk to many of the residents that back onto the neighborhood, and they all told that they were satisfied with the application. And so, when we went through the process, they changed the garbage into those ground molochs that are less intrusive. They included a smart channel at the intersection of Hunt Club and Hawthorne. They reduced the drive-through, and I think on balance, the president of the Community Association in Hunt Club Park told me that the association is satisfied that the applicant has gone a long way to address the community. Now, Mr. Cook took the day off work, so you can see that he's passionate about this, and all of us, I think, can sympathize with that. If we backed onto it, we'd probably prefer that it not be there. But as the applicant pointed out as well, they already have as a right a car wash. And so, I kind of ask myself, would I rather have a second cup or a car wash? Because that really is the challenge, right? And on balance, I think I agree with the majority of the community that I think accepts that this is probably the best use for this site. So I would ask the committee to support it.
Thanks, Councillor Dean. Anybody else? Okay, so on the item? Carrie? Did you have a question, by the way? No. Okay. You have to sit in your seats to actually dissent. And I don't have no idea. Yeah, because you're afraid of the pedestrians that are all going to be walking across the street there. Again, take a drive out because you wouldn't want to cycle. No, maybe you could cycle. You probably could. You probably could. It's pretty fun. But you could, because you know what, there's yep, you can go through Laurie Greenberg and then out and around. You could get there, but then you would actually see the lay of the land. I think that's important too. I think Councillor Deans has addressed her residents very well. Yeah, thank you. So we have 2 registered dissents. Thank you. All right, so we're going to take a break now. Unfortunately, I wasn't as nice as I tried to be. Remember, I said 1:30. So, just to continue my niceness, let's come back at 1:40. Right? Excellent. Like I said, you never know whether the elevators are working, or it might change your decision on where you're going to eat.